Hey, welcome to the Science of Happier Work. I'm Jackson Kirchis with Happiness Means Business. And as always, we'll talk about some practical tools as well as some interesting research that can help you to be happier at work. So today we're going to focus on this idea of meaning, kind of purpose, or I just feel like it's a common thing to hear people say, like, well, I don't know, my job's fine, or maybe I like it, or it pays the bills, but it doesn't feel all that like meaningful or special. So we'll talk about a few tactics you can use to kind of improve your sense of maybe engagement, fulfillment, whatever you want to call it. And a good example of this, I remember I was on a flight, geez, I think it was months ago. I think it was with Southwest. And the flight attendant had to deliver it's required as part of their job description to deliver the pre-flight briefing, for lack of a better term, when they talk about the oxygen mask, the uh, flotation devices, all that stuff. And this guy was almost like a stand-up comedian. I mean, really, I don't remember all of the jokes he said, but it was things like, if in the event that the cabin pressure loses oxygen and an oxygen mask drops from the ceiling. Now, we are not Spirit Airlines, so that probably won't happen, but just in case it does, and on and on. He's like, in the event of a water landing, the life jackets are under your seat, and they have a device that, upon touching the water, will send out a light to alert the Coast Guard or the sharks to your location, and we'll see who gets there first. So he had all these little things like that, and you could tell that he just wanted to be like a stand-up comedian or a real jokester. And so at the same time, though, it's like there are certain things you're required by law to do as a flight attendant. There's information you have to give. And so I thought it was a really good example of something we'll talk about later in this episode of what's called job crafting, which comes from the world of organizational psychology. And it's just the idea that you can sort of craft your job to be more aligned with the things that you find enjoyable, fulfilling, and that you're really good at. So in this case, he still did his job. He checked off all the boxes of the oxygen mask, the flotation devices, the safety procedures, the exits, everything. But he did so in a way that was kind of reframing his relationship to the customers, that my job's not just to tell you about this, it's to kind of make you laugh and have a good time and lighten up the mood of the flight. Another example of this, even I was getting my haircut the other day, and the stylist told me, like, they tell us we're supposed to get this done in like 30 minutes, but I'm kind of a perfectionist. And, she talked to me about like how I could do my hair, and, I have dry skin, and like, you could try doing this and this. And it was almost like she, again, was kind of like educating me. And she said, I almost kind of feel like sometimes I see myself as like a teacher or like something like that. Because she's going beyond just cutting hair and really delivering this kind of next level experience. And so there are a few things that we can keep in mind if we're struggling to feel kind of re-engage that passion or enjoyment for work. So the first one, right, before we get too big and say, oh, how do you find purpose and meaning? That can feel like a really big topic. Well, actually, a really simple way to do it is just to make friends and build relationships at work. And, sometimes this can be annoying. You feel like, oh, forced fun, or, a pizza party. I saw a meme the other day that was like this massive oversized pizza box, and on the front, like the inside cover, it said, please don't form a union. And it was basically a meme saying, like, company appreciation parties. That's basically what they are, is, yeah, we're not going to pay you more, but here's an ice cream cone. And so sometimes I think this idea of like building relationships at work can feel like that, but there's really important data point on this. So Gallup, one of the leading research organizations when it comes to work and organizations, they have a metric that, one of the questions they ask people is kind of weird in their surveys. They say, do you have a best friend at work? And it turns out that people who say yes to that question are 7 times, that's 700%, more engaged than people who don't. And now engagement, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a measurement of your interest and enthusiasm for your work. So now, as an employer or management or leader, obviously there's pretty powerful implications there of it actually pays to have your people on their teams be friends and well connected. But even for you as an individual, if you're thinking about, oh, how do I, get more out of work? 700% increase if you have a best friend. So that's to say that it really goes a long way to go out of your way to build those relationships. And, that can be as simple. I remember back in my days when I was in industry in a very large billion-dollar company, I would do things like, "Hey, let's get a virtual coffee," or, I just moved over to a new team and I'd, do something like, "Hey, could we do a small group Zoom, just get to know each other?" And again, that can be hard sometimes because it sounds like, well, I'm just wasting time, or I have a million things on my to-do list that I need to get done. But what I would posit, based on that research I just shared, is that actually taking the time to build meaningful relationships or even friendships can really go a long way in your enjoyment of work. I actually remember from my time in those days as well, I've had two kind of work best friends that weren't even at my branch. I like looked on the company directory and saw we had some similar interests, and we ended up having a monthly Zoom, right? And it was on the calendar. It was a work meeting, right? Just a check-in, and we worked at the same company, so it wasn't like I had to sneak around and hide it or something. But it was really like a nice break during the day. And each month I kind of had it to look forward to. And actually, one of those people I still keep in touch with. I just talked to him the other night, and we're really good friends now. So the idea here is that you should prioritize developing a best friend at work. And obviously, ideally, you have multiple friends at work. And the simplest way to do that is to schedule some sort of habit or checklist into your calendar. Maybe if you're like me, around 3 p.m. on most days, your brain sort of shuts off for an hour. So maybe during that time, you try to do 30 minutes on Monday through Thursday. You try to do a little connection with a friend at work, or, maybe each week you do a little icebreaker. Or obviously, a great one is, on a Thursday evening, say, "Hey team, I'm thinking about stopping at this local restaurant for a drink or for a snack after work. Would you want to come by?" So all those little things, right? Being very intentional about them, I think, can really pay off in the quality of work. Because again, I think we overlook this when we think about how to make meaningless work or how to make work we're not super into feel better. We tend to think, oh, I've got to, change everything or get a new job. And that can be the case sometimes, but oftentimes just making friends at work and building those relationships will really go a long way. So another thing you can consider is, are you using your strengths or your abilities that you feel you are uniquely good at? So, Dr. Marty Seligman, who's one of the pioneers of positive psychology, says that the recipe for the feeling of meaning and purpose is really identifying your signature strengths and then using those to have an impact on something bigger than you, even if it's just the team or the organization. So, there are diagnostic tools you can take, Clifton Strengths, Via Strengths, that I think they're like $20 and they're probably worth doing. But you may be able to figure this out yourself. And a good question for that is, what feels like fun to you but like work to others? What feels like fun to you, but like work for others? And I can actually give you a couple examples of that. So for me, something that feels like fun to me and like work to others is like learning. So like reading nonfiction books, reading research papers, nerdy psychology stuff, and then like teaching it to other people, right? Because I'm like happy to jump on like a free, I'll jump on a Zoom and give a free virtual training. I don't care, just because I kind of enjoy talking about this stuff. Whereas if you think about some other people, the idea of like public speaking for no reason is like the worst thing they can imagine. So that's me. So now when I was back in industry, something I would do is like say, hey, we have, monthly, like whatever our team was, entry, data entry team summits. Like, hey, I could do a little 15-minute presentation on emotional intelligence in the workplace or the psychological dynamics of great teams. So that was something that still kind of gave, I got credit for, so to speak, in the eyes of my supervisors, but it was something that I was really good at naturally and felt easy to do. And so I kind of added that into my work. Now, at the same time, you might be the type of person that's like really analytical. I remember when I was at the company, there's this kid in the kind of our neighboring department, so to speak, who built out this entire new Excel model that you could use to calculate like handle times, which is how long it took people to process orders. And he was like just super into it. He basically did it on his own. I was like, and of course he looked really good for doing that. But it's like, I would never want to do that nor try, but because that was aligned with his strength and being very analytical, it was easy. So the idea here is to just do a little bit of informal, or like I said, formal, you can use a diagnostic tool, inventory on what are you really good at? What kind of comes naturally to you? Are you a people person? And so maybe even, another example of this is like I'm pretty good at having conversations with people and like kind of dealing with emotional things that are kind of stressful or sensitive. Like to me, it just kind of comes easy. I don't shy away from that. So I remember when I had to deliver my first like job at risk type message to an employee, like on my team, I was willing to step up and have that conversation because that's something I was good at, right? Is having difficult conversations. So work with yourself or work with your team to think, well, hey, what are some of the things that I'd like to lean into that I'm good at and do more of those things at work? And maybe there are some things that are really outside of your strengths that bring you a lot of stress. And it may be that, you could give a couple hours of those types of things to someone else on your team who's good at them. So that's the second idea, right? Is if you can lean into your strengths, there's a lot of research that shows that's going to make you feel more engaged and you're going to get more meaning in your work when you're doing things that are aligned with what you're good at and you're motivated to do. Final perspective to consider kind of relates back to the last one, but it's understanding the impact your work has to the organization, to other teams, and obviously to the customers. My business partner Paul talks about this pretty incredible story where he was working in a big pulp mill, like this paper processing plant in Canada. And obviously their workers were not super engaged. They were like, they just viewed it as a job and it wasn't great. Well, he did a couple things. The first thing he did was he asked the executive team, like, what do you actually like? What is this weird paper pellets you're making? What are they used for? And they said, well, actually, there's a lot of weird use cases. They turn them into diapers. They turn them into these adhesive bandages that are used to give medication to people. They use them in like athletic and sports tape. And so he said, okay, awesome. We're going to have like posters made and little flyers and whatnot. We'll hand those out, do some education sessions, even just put up posters of, a mother holding a child in a diaper or, a doctor putting a bandage on someone and actually explain to the employees, like, look, these little random paper pellets you're making are actually serving a functional purpose to the world. Like you're keeping babies clean and helping people with their medicine. So they got a lot of, positive feedback from that. He also had them do kind of a community engagement thing where he said, hey, really small piece of our operating expenses here, like, because this plant spent like $200,000 a day just to operate because of all the energy and inputs and all the staff they had. He's like, what if you spent an extra $10,000 and you ordered playground equipment and then you had your staff volunteer to build a playground for the local community? And he told me that in this little town of, I don't know, 1,000 people, it was literally the front page of the local newspaper, like every single day for a month is like, the employees in the factory, they're building this new playground. And so again, it was understanding and, doing some things to have an impact on the customer or on the community and trying to take that stuff that's very disjoint and far away and like bring it to light a little bit. I even think about sometimes in an organization, it goes a really long way to kind of point out, hey, well, this thing we're asking you to do is maybe a little bit annoying or something, and it's not ideal, but actually this helps the accounting department process things so people can get paid on time. Right? All these little things, so much of the time, it just helps to have a little bit of context because if you just ask someone to do it, like they're going to be like, well, why can't I do this? Or why bother? When you give them a little bit of a reason, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. There's been studies. I think there's even one study they gave an example of this where they go up to people and ask them to cut in front of them in line. And if they don't give a reason, people tend to be like, wait, why do you want to cut me? Like, no. But if they go to people, cut them in line and say like, hey, so do you mind if I cut in front of you? I'm kind of in a hurry. And they say, oh, okay, sure. Well, if you pay close attention to that, the reason or the why behind it isn't actually that logical. Like, of course you want to cut me because you're in a hurry. But again, just giving a reason or a why just makes it feel like it makes more sense. So when you as a team or you as an individual are doing something and you're maybe like, what's the point of doing this work? It seems so pointless. If you can actually get clarity on how that fits into the customer or fits into other parts of the organization or fits into, the bigger picture, that tends to make it a lot more psychologically satisfying, right? To see how all those pieces fit together. So what I'll leave you with, right? We talked about this idea of building relationships. We talked about using your strength. We talked about trying to get a sense of clarity or understanding on what the kind of result or the impact of your work is. Protocol you can keep in mind for this is called job crafting. And if you Google it, you can find like worksheets that guide you through it. It's a whole process that we sometimes coach people on it. So happy to help with that. But really, it says you can shift a little bit. You can craft your role in your job or your career to do more of the things that you're good at, and that's going to get you more meaning. So they break it down, and there's three types. So there's task crafting, TASK, relational crafting, and cognitive crafting. So I'll touch on each of those briefly. Task crafting is, can you craft or shift a little bit some of the tasks, the to-dos that you're responsible for? So maybe it's doing a little bit more of some and a little bit less of others, right? Again, in alignment with what your role is and your expectation is, right? If you're I don't know, an engineer, you can't just all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what? I think I want to go start calling customers and selling them products. Like that's not your job. But you can kind of extend and say, let's say, for example, you're in the marketing team, okay? And you really enjoy event planning. And every year you do this big, trade show at your company or this little like company leadership conference. Maybe you say, hey, would it be okay if I, helped out in planning a little piece of this conference because I kind of like the whole event planning stuff and I'm happy to research like venues and reach out to caterers and plan that part of it. And it's like, sure, that's a huge value add. And at the same time, you may be able to find a little bit of tasks that you're not so good at, right? So for instance, maybe you aren't really a big fan of like, leading group discussions. And so every month you have this like weekly meeting thing, maybe you could work with someone on your team and say, hey, would you co-host this with me just so I feel more comfortable? So again, you want to be careful that you're not just dumping stuff on people, but generally, if you have a good reason and you manage it, there are small things you can do to limit or lean away from tasks that you don't enjoy and aren't valuable and you're not as good at, and tasks that you can take on or lean into that you're better at and you enjoy more. Of course, there's no silver bullet in any role. There's going to be stuff that you don't love doing that you have to do. So I don't want to be naive here. But task crafting is a very kind of ground level way to do more of the good stuff and less of the bad and make you more satisfied. The next one is relational crafting. So that's shifting how you relate to your customers or to the people around you, your team. So another good example of that would be something like, hey, I want to do more of being a kind of facilitator and connector at my company. So I'm going to start an interest group, right? I know back in the day when I was in industry, we had these ERGs, they were called employee resource groups. And I think there was one of them that was actually we had like a little informal group of 5 people that was about like Buddhism and meditation because we were all into like mindfulness and practices like that. So that's relational crafting, right? I'm going beyond my normal role because when we're thinking about the relationships, my normal role was I have a team of 16 people I'm responsible for supervising, I have my manager that I report to, and then I have my supervisor peers, and that's kind of it. But I took on a little extra to say, oh, I can be involved in this small group thing. So you can kind of sometimes shift how you relate to people, right? And same thing, maybe if right now you have this thing where part of your role is managing the summer interns and you say, this is part of my thing where like my relational crafting that I don't really like this part. Maybe you could talk to one of your peers and say, hey, would you be willing to take this on? But in exchange, is there something from you that I can take on, right? It should be an even exchange, but it's about changing how you relate to people in your organization, to your customers, to everyone involved in your context. Finally, we have cognitive crafting, which is really fundamentally shifting how you view things. Again, cognitive is in kind of your perspective on it. And this is just a shift, right? And so a simple example of this is like the one I said at the very beginning, how, my hairstylist, right? So she could have kind of viewed her role cognitively as, I'm a hairstylist, and she did. But she also kind of viewed it as, hey, I'm an educator. I'm here to, tell the customer these interesting things and, offer suggestions and almost be like a consultant. So cognitive crafting is shifting that role. A common one I hear about from people in sales is shifting from being like, I'm not a salesperson, because when I think sales, I think of like pushy and, calling people and being annoying. But when I view myself as a consultant, where I go to them and say, hey, what are you struggling with right now? Oh, well, you're struggling raising money for your nonprofit. Well, oh, that's interesting. I've done a lot of research on that and I kind of consult with organizations who do it. We also have a software, but here's a few ideas. See how that shift is probably going to make you more successful and maybe enjoy the work a little bit more. So there's task crafting, relational crafting, cognitive crafting. All of them have to do with reframing and reshaping, I should say, our perspective on how we view our work and then how we do our work and how we engage with the people around us while we work. So I would encourage you to try some of those practices as well. And like I said, if you're curious or you're thinking about how do I actually implement some of this, you can also reach out to us too, whether it's informal, I'll talk through it, or formal coaching. That's stuff we work on as well. So there you have it. That is how you can make work that maybe is not super meaningful, you're not totally passionate about. Those are a few tactics you can use to get more out of it, right? To re-engage some of that passion and be more effective in your work, but also enjoy it a whole lot more. So that's all for now. Thank you for watching or for listening. We're here every couple of weeks, sometimes every month, it depends, but at the very least, every month for this live video podcast on the science of happier work. This has been Jackson Kirchis with Happiness Means Business and Warrior Leader Training. I'll see you next time.